today we're talking about evaluating resources for both quality and potential bias. And often in our culture, the word bias has kind of a negative connotation. And often that's accurate or fair. But in this case, I think it might be better to think of bias as having a particular perspective. And having a perspective doesn't necessarily make something good or bad, it just is the way it is, right? Many of us here are Mennonites, and that means that we could say we are biased towards pacifist interpretations of Scripture, right? That doesn't mean it's better or worse than one thing or another. It just means that this is how we view things. This is the perspective that we are using to approach Scripture. So as we go through our work this afternoon, I hope that you will consider that everything here in the library has a perspective that it is trying to get across. And again, that perspective does not make it necessarily good or bad, but it is something to be aware of as we move forward. So we have three goals for you today in the session today. First, we want to understand the different types of authority that a person or group might have. Now, when I say authority, what I'm talking about is what is it about a specific person or group that makes them worth listening to, right? We've talked about how, in the past, we've talked about how scholarship is kind of a conversation where people who have come before have kind of put their perspectives or their opinions out there in the form of their writing, and you listen by reading, and then you put your own perspective out with your own writing, right? But there's a lot of voices here in our library, let alone in the world, right? So how is it that you choose who's worth listening to and who's not? In our mind, this kind of gets at authority. Why is somebody worth listening to, whereas somebody else might not be? The second goal for today is that we want to give you some practical steps you can take to consider a particular resource's quality, credibility, its bias. And finally, we want to give you some time to put these steps into practice and actually begin working on the second of your preparatory assignments, which is your introduction, outline, and bibliography. So this second of the preparatory assignments, the introduction, outline, and bibliography, is going to be the focus of our workshops today and for the next two sessions after today. So we're actually, in the order that they're listed here, we're actually going to work backwards, starting with the bibliography today. The bibliography, Jamie wants you to identify your primary texts and 15 to 20 additional scholarly sources that are relevant to your argument. So we're going to be talking about how do we determine what's relevant and worth including in this paper. So before we really get started, we're going to play a little game, right? I think many of you have probably experienced or at least heard about the problem of fake news being shared on social media. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some examples of some social media posts. And as a group, we're going to vote whether these are real or fake. Okay? I don't want to discuss, I don't want to talk about why we think they're real or fake. I just want, yes, it's real, no, it's fake. Okay? Understand? Okay. Okay, so here's the first one. A person named Leela Bandar has posted a news article saying Fortnite addiction is forcing kids into video game rehab. So, who thinks that's real? 2, 3, 4. Okay, who thinks it's fake? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I think the fakes have it. Okay, the story is true. That was a true story. Second one, 7-year-old calls 911 after receiving snow pants for Christmas. So who thinks this is a real story? 1, 2, 3. Okay. 4. Who thinks it's fake? 1, 2. Okay. It's another fake one. No, this one was also true. All right, here we're getting a little political. Trump mocks Trudeau, Trudeau being Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, for celebrating Thanksgiving 6 weeks early. And there's a little screen grab of a Donald Trump tweet that says, Justin Trudeau has just tweeted Happy Thanksgiving in the middle of October. This has to be the dumbest tweet in history, idiot. So, this certainly sounds like something our president might say. Who thinks this is a true story? 1, 2, 3. Okay, who thinks it's fake? Okay. Oops. Yes, okay, that was false, so good job. Okay, here's another one. Campaign to change the name of fire ants to Spicy Boys gathers pace. Real? 3, okay. Fake. Okay, more fakes. You guys are all very doubtful of all of these. That one is true.
What? Spicy Boys.
Okay, here's another one. Breaking news, Black Lives Matter leader kept virtually all donations. Real? Nobody. Fake? Oops. Okay, so we've done 5 so far, and we've gotten 2 of them right, okay? But kind of the point of why I'm doing this is I want you to start understanding that just like the things that we have here in the library, there is enough information in many of these cases for you to make more than just a guess. You can start to kind of get at whether these things are worth listening to or not. Okay, so let's look at this one. Dutch court rejects man's request to be 20 years younger. Okay, so it sounds unbelievable, right? You can't be younger than you are. Why would a man go to court for this? But let's start looking. So this comes from The Guardian. Does anybody know The Guardian? Okay, so this is a fairly well-known news organization out of the UK, right? So it seems like if somebody's sharing a news story from The Guardian, it's probably has some truth to it. So that one's true, right? Okay, here's another. Wearable stickers that promote healing, really? Okay, so where is this one from? Can anybody see? Goop. Okay, who knows what goop.com is?
It's
Fake news.
That's that one actor's company.
Yeah, so this is a company that is owned and run by the actress Gwyneth Paltrow. And they're sort of notorious for having some really kind of wacky health benefit things like this. You can put stickers on and heal your body. You don't need to go to a doctor, just get a sticker, right? So be very skeptical of things that are from Goop, right? Okay, so this is ash from a volcano eruption in Japan. Now this one doesn't have a source, right? There's nothing, this is just a picture that somebody posted. And I'm gonna try something, I wanna see if this works. I didn't actually try this as I was preparing, so. We'll see if it works. So what I did was within Chrome, if you right-click on a photo, you can do this search Google for image, and it will actually run the image through Google and then find other places where that image appears, right? And so we get a bunch of images here from different news sites. Ontake Shrine covered in ash. So it seems like maybe this actually is a real story. Right? Okay. We've got a couple more. Wi-Fi linked to cancer and DNA damage, says new report. Here's what to do. What do you think?
Fake.
Okay, why? Those of you who said false, why do you think it's false?
The resource is blocked. Like,
Uh-huh.
it's not really credible. You know.
Okay. So, yeah. So Andy said this is from a blog, blog.bulletproof.com, right? Now, I wouldn't say that you automatically write off every blog that everyone's ever written, but it's certainly reason to be skeptical because anybody can publish a blog, including people who really know what they're talking about, right? But also people who don't know what they're talking about. So you would want to look into this particular source and see if you could find more about it before you just trusted what it says. Okay, last one. Man has heart attack while eating at the heart attack grill. True or false? Yeah. So this is from NPR, National Public Radio, which is a fairly reputable news organization here in the United States. So I think we can probably trust this one, yeah? Okay, so when we started, the first 5 we got 2 out of 5, right? And that was just kind of looking at them, taking them at face value. So we're not very good at it. But once we started doing a little bit more digging and trying to understand where this information was coming from, on the next 5, we got all of them right? So the point of all of that is to say that authority is important. And again, authority is why do we listen to a particular person or group over another? What I'm getting at in those is that certain groups or organizations have more authority than other groups or people, right? We trust NPR more than we trust Goop because NPR has a long history of providing accurate information. So when it comes to particular people, whether it be authors, editors, things like that, people who are putting scholarship out into the world, what do you think, what are some reasons that you think, I actually want to hear from you. So what do you think is a reason that you would listen to somebody and what they have to say in an academic context?
Number of citation by other writers.
Yeah, so that kind of gets at what is their reputation, right? What do other scholars in the field think of them? Yeah. What else? Oh, I want to write this. Who else?
Need to be tested in that field, like tested and tried.
Okay, so yeah, so we can call that professional expertise. They've been working in the field for a while and they've kind of been through, they know the ropes, they know what they're talking about because they've been through it before, right? Andy?
The publisher who published the article.
Okay, so that kind of, yeah, that gets back at reputation. We know certain publishers are more reputable than others, yeah. What is it you're doing here at AMBS? What are you trying to do?
Get a degree.
Right. Why? So that people will take you seriously, right? When you say, I know about theology or biblical studies, and I have a degree to back it up, right? So we can say academic expertise. What else?
Friends with them or know them or connected somehow.
Okay, yeah, and especially when it comes to like the social media piece that we were talking about, I think we put a lot of weight behind things that certain people share versus things that other people share. Like, I know I have some fairly crazy relatives that when I see things on social media from them, I think, well, I know that's not true. Personal connections. There's one more that I'm looking for. So let's say I were going to write an article or a book, right? And I wanted to write about the experience of being an African American man in the United States. Okay, so I could study and learn a lot and become an academic expert on that, right? But as a white man, I will never have lived that experience in the same way that a black man has, right? So we kind of call this indigenous expertise. This is an expertise that is very much a part of who the person is, and just by virtue of who the person is, we can trust things that they have to say on particular topics, right? So when you're considering whether or not to use a particular resource here in the library, we do kind of the same thing. We think about what sort of authority or expertise went into that item's creation. It's helpful to think about what sort of authority the author is writing under, but there are some other things that can kind of start to give you a clue about what sort of perspective and authority a particular item might have. So, like Andy said, you can look at the publisher of a particular work. Being accepted for publication by a reputable publisher lends a certain amount of credibility, regardless of if you've ever heard of the author before, right? So if you've never heard of me, but I get accepted for publication by Oxford, there's something of quality in what I've written, right? But the other thing to keep in mind is that many publishers also have their own perspectives and leanings, right? If you see something in our library that's been published by Herald Press, this is likely coming at it from a Mennonite perspective. Other publishers have their own sort of perspective. So InterVarsity Press, Zondervan, Baker, these are more evangelical leaning. Fortress, Westminster, John Knox are mainline. There's some others here. If it's self-published, who knows what their perspective is, right? You have to do some more digging. Again, none of these things mean, I don't like evangelicals, so don't use anything by Zondervan. That's not what I'm telling you. What I'm telling you is that when you pick something up and see it's by Zondervan, you can kind of get a clue of where they might be coming from in terms of making their argument. So another piece to consider is the author or editor. So where do they work? Do they work at Princeton? Do they work here at AMBS? Do they work at Stanford? These different places have different views on things and can start to kind of give you a clue where the author might be coming from. Again, it's not a guarantee. Nobody who works at a particular institution necessarily signs on to every doctrinal statement of that institution, but there's a lot of or overlap in terms of their perspectives, right? And again, sort of what we talked about before, how do other scholars, or current scholars especially, if it's been some time since this person was writing, how do current scholars view their life and their work? And then the last thing to consider is the age of the material. Now again, just because something is old doesn't make it bad. Just because something is new doesn't make it good. If you're studying Augustinian theology, you're not going to find anything that Augustine has put out in the last how many hundred years, right? Everything that he wrote is very old. That doesn't make it bad, it's just the reality of when he lived. But Augustinian studies have continued to grow and evolve, and current Augustinian scholars are continuing to grow the field. And so looking at current scholarship, you want to find some newer stuff, right? So that's a lot of ideas and theoretical stuff. I think I'm going to turn it over to Carl, and he's going to actually walk you through some real examples of how we would do this with some library stuff.
So we wanted to kind of give you the idea that just because something is in our library doesn't automatically make it a great source for your paper. So we walked back to the 230s and we pulled off some books that we think, you might want to use with some caution. So this little number here, called The Gospel of Redemption by Walter Connor. It's from 1945. It happened to our copy belonged to Harold S. Bender, who was one of the founding people of the seminary. And it's published by Broadman Press, Nashville, Tennessee. He was a professor of theology at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, which is Southern Baptist. And it talks about the books he's written. This may not be a bad source for understanding what Southern Baptists thought in the 1940s, but we probably wouldn't want you pulling this off the shelf and just going for it in your papers as some major source in the field. So just because it landed in the library, and there's a story behind how it landed in the library, and there's a reason why we keep it in the library, it doesn't automatically make it a great thing to put in your paper. Yeah, Jamie.
Funny example, because he was one of McClendon's teachers.
Well, so maybe he's not so bad. But to interrogate things critically based on how they read. Here's a little book called Building the Dispensations by Clifton Fowler, who was an expert of creating dispensational theology, which is something to use again with caution, also from the 1940s. it might be a good source for understanding what people were saying about that in that time period, but using it uncritically in your paper might not come across so well. And then finally, it's not limited to old books. This is a new book that's on our shelves. It's a book from Herald Press. So it's Mennonite, and it's by a pretty famous author, John Howard Yoder. And if you read the little biography in the back, it gives you a clue as to how you might want to use it with caution, which is to say it talks about his sexual harassment of women and the abuse that occurred and the disciplinary process and the complexity of working with Yoder as a resource. So just because it's a new book from Herald Press on our shelves also doesn't mean that you use it uncritically, and think about who's behind it and what kind of authority it may or may not have. So yeah, don't just dismiss these books because they may be good sources for something. There's a reason why they're here, and there's a reason why we keep them. They might have been McClendon's teacher, even though they're an oldie, or they might have some content in them that could twist the gospel somehow. We don't know. So the main point here is use your stuff critically. And yeah, now it's your turn.
Yeah. So the rest of our time today is dedicated to you having some time to start working on your bibliography. So as you search through the library's physical and online collections and look for things that you can get from some of our partner libraries, be sure to be thinking critically and considering what it is about these particular resources that makes it worth inclusion in your final papers. I do have some worksheets here that just kind of help you start putting this information together. It's just got places for you to fill out information about each resource. These are kind of the building blocks of your citations, right? So, and then it's got a place for you to annotate or talk about why this particular thing is worth including in your final paper, which will help you as you have a big stack of things that you're trying to read, figure out which things you want to look at and which things you don't, right? So use this as you will. I'm not, taking a grade on it or anything, but it's just here to help you. Carl and I are here, Jamie's here, so if you want to start looking and if you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of one of us. Are there any questions before we start?
I mean, do library has a policy to have books from all kind of denominations, or are they according to a MBS policy or denomination?
The policy is that we get books from a lot of places and we rarely get rid of them. So that means we have a lot of different perspectives. And over time, it's been our faculty who have chosen things. So as our faculty have changed over time, we've kind of evolved along with that. But we don't get rid of things very easily. So because something may be a really good source for a particular thing. So that means we have things here that you may disagree with, everyone in the class may disagree with, that may be problematic on some accounts, but they're still going to be in our library because they're helpful for something.
I did not get the point how misconduct of the person disqualifies the group, or how do we know about that?
It might or it might not.
Yeah.
It might mean that you read really carefully any sections that have to do with sexual ethics, if they had sexual misconduct. That's just to be very broad brush about it. But it may affect how they interpreted things. There was a story in the New York Times today this isn't just a theology thing. There was a story in the New York Times today about whether people should teach authors who were implicated in the Me Too movement. So, should you read literary works by someone who is a sexual harasser? Not everyone agrees about that in the academy. So different people might have different views on that, and so it's just helpful to be aware of the sources that you're using and what background they bring, because that shifts the authority that they might have in the field.
AMBS does have an official policy related to using John Howard Yoder's work. You can find it on the website. So
You say AMBS doesn't have?
it does.
No,
It does.
it
It's here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that didn't include us going and taking all of his books off the shelf. We wouldn't do that. Because we want to use the work critically and carefully.